That's correct. The other pieces we'll speak to in just a moment as it relates to some of
The emergency
contracts.
purchases.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, hello again. So Dr. Westfall and I are going to tag team on this brief presentation this evening to give you just an overview of the process that our RFP selection committee went through to bring to you the recommendation this evening for a PD service provider around diversity, equity, inclusion. So I want to make sure the clicker's working. It is. Wanted to open up with just a process that we follow because we felt that that was very important in terms of providing context here for this evening. So back in February, we reached out to some staff members and were able to form a committee of about 12 people to be a part of this very in-depth process. So the team included myself and Dr. Westfall representing cabinet. We also had 3 directors, and one of the things we really enjoyed about this process is that we had representation from the operations side of the organization, the academic side of the organization, and the human resources side in terms of director representation. We also had 3 school leaders, again representing elementary, middle, and high school, and then we had 4 representatives from the PDC committee, which Dr. Westfall just addressed here, our professional development committee, and we again ended up with representation from the elementary, middle, and high school levels. So that was very important to us to have the representation as a cross section of who's in the organization. And so after that, we established our focus. The focus was given to us by way of strategic plan number 22, which was about our coming together to walk through this process to select a PD service provider. And as we were thinking about our why, we landed on really 3 things that I want to share here with you very briefly. We wanted to ensure that the PD service provider could help us, along with engaging with our staff, develop a firm understanding of our LPS equity-centered vision, beliefs, and purpose in terms of taking that across the entire organization, to embed our collective why throughout the professional learning experience. So really, this is more than just training. This is a professional learning experience and opportunity for our staff in order to cultivate a sense of belonging, purpose, value, urgency within every staff member across the entire organization, and also to build capacity within our own staff to support the equity-centered strategic plan. So after we established our focus for our work, we then researched and developed the RFP. It was then formally announced on April 1st with the deadline of April the 16th. As a result, we received a number of bids. I will share that with you here in just a moment. We then reviewed and evaluated and even ranked each of the bids that were submitted by the firms. We then scheduled virtual interviews with 5 firms. 4 actually showed up. We had 1 that decided not to participate in the process. We also then discussed the pros and cons after each one of those interviews. They were all held virtually, so we basically had a debrief session. This is the pros and cons of our interviews with those prospective PD service providers. And then after much deliberation, much discussion, reference checks, all of that goes into the process. We then selected the firm that we believe will provide services to best meet our professional learning needs. So these are the names of the PD service providers. There were 10, and their bids ranged as low as $20,000 and as much as $155,000. And so from this point, Dr. Westfall is going to share with you who we landed on in terms of our recommendation to you and any additional information you may need. And again, this is for first read on this evening.
So as Dr. Seahorn said, we looked through all the different organizations, and one of the best fits that what we recognized was the work that we had done in the winter of this last year with our book study. And the team from the core collaborative was the recommendation that we would like to bring forward to you tonight. The scope of the work is really about what we realized was we really wanted to work on what it meant to belong in this community. And we wanted to make sure that we weren't distracted by the ideas of dividing things, that we really wanted to make sure that our children in our district that we serve understood that they belonged. And so this seemed to be the right fit. And we really were looking to make sure that that is exactly where our focus was. And so that was why this one rose to the top. The cost of it, actually, one of the things when I got into the work is helping to design it. They actually offered us quite a bit more, but we scaled this down because we recognized that we wanted to take our time in moving this forward and making sure that we bring not only our board along with it, because we'll be extending our book study with the authors, but that we worked with our parents and with our leadership to understand where we're going with this work, and it didn't feel like we were trying to push forward too fast or do something that was not a part of what we were all going to do together. So there's just some details on the cost, and we did add an additional opportunity for the buildings to buy the text that we were going to study so that they could look at them as well. So that was a part of the total contract cost, as you can see there. The other thing we wanted to do was explain the way that we designed it. And so part of the work that I contribute to is to make sure that all of our professional development fits together. And so as we settled into the process, we had 3 tiers. Those tiers included a keynote to the entire district at the beginning of the year. So very often we do this work. We had Sarah Martin from New Zealand a couple of years ago. Last year we did not have one because of the pandemic. So this year we are having the authors, John Crownapple and Boyd Cobb. Actually, I think it would just be Mr. Crownapple this time because Mr. Cobb works for the Department of Education in Colorado and he is already booked that day. So we will just have Mr. Crownapple. But they will just do an over session for the entire district virtually. And we won't be gathering together yet. It's not really quite time. Tier 2 then is to work with our district leadership team. We're going to have 4 sessions spread out working through the book, just like what we did together. And in addition to that, we will have 4 sessions with our principals so we can get them starting to reflect on the work. And then we're going to have 1 session, a similar amount of time, with our middle level leadership. And so we wanted to make sure that we included our managers and our coordinators in that kind of work. And they typically don't end up sitting in the room with us with our principals. So we wanted to make sure that opportunity was available.
Excuse me. Explain what you consider middle
Yeah. So our
middle level leadership.
SLPs, coordinators, let's see, the supervisors for operations.
Okay.
Right. So we were just trying to do a roundabout, making sure that we included operations.
Makes total sense.
It is, yeah, thank you. And then the last thing is we're going to start, based on the data that we took way back when we started looking at our equity-centered strategic plan, was from the data that we took from our stakeholders, where they said they really wanted us to start looking at personalized learning for our children and including them. And a really big focus was on those special areas like special education and gifted. And so we wanted to make sure that our buildings understood how those students needed to be included in the work that we're doing in the classrooms and what we can do about that. So they will be attending to the secondary buildings to start with meetings in the second semester once we all understand. Part of the work that I spent some time with the authors on is understanding that they're going to meet us where we are. So when it comes to looking at it, they are not necessarily looking at any specific story to tell us, but they're really trying to help us get to where we want to get, which is what Dr. Tucker really shared so especially, is making sure that all of our students are getting the personalized and customized learning that we intend for them. So that's really our work on this. And do I have one more? Oh, so this is the text that we'll be looking at, and those are the groups that they have worked on with before. That is one of the pieces of research that Dr. Seahorn did, was she called them to see what it is. So we wanted to make sure that while we were doing this work, that there wasn't anything underneath that we didn't agree with. As you said, we really do bring some of the best things together from all the organizations, and that's the same in this case. So, thank you.
What do you think would be, what's one of the takeaways from this? What do you think that professionals to have they leave this training? What would they have?
You know, I think AJ, really one of the things that's really hard to believe, because we do end up landing this in a lot of titles. And I really think that's unfortunate, because one of the areas that in Liberty Public Schools that we really want to talk about is how to include, for example, our special education students in our regular ed classes. That's just been a focus area that we've had for a long time. It doesn't really rise to the surface when we start talking about the different organizations that we look at that, and we get distracted from that, and that's unfortunate. Because really we want to make sure that we're personalizing learning, and the rest of that is really not our story here. I know it's hard to believe considering a lot of things that are happening today, but I promise you that we really are trying to look at inclusion when it comes to children and not color or, I don't know, poverty. I think it's just everybody. And I know that's really hard to understand sometimes, but that is really what we're trying to do.
The other piece similar to that is if you think about an individualized education plan like we've had for our special ed students for a long time, right? Since IDEA was enacted. Invert that in terms of thinking about what might it look like to have an individual plan for every single learner. State of Missouri is moving in that direction as far as an ICAP. We've made some changes from a policy level as it relates to a tiered diploma and real world and market value assets. And so if you take that customization and individualization like we've seen throughout the years with the special needs student and apply that to every single student in terms of preparing them for what they're going to experience beyond high school, that's that individualized tailoring that we've talked about quite a bit this evening. Which centers in and around this notion of belonging and our shared humanity, right? And that dignity piece. Not to speak for the board, but as we walked through this book, we took a pretty deep dive, and I think it echoed with where we're heading within our strategic plan and getting toward that term thrive for every single one of our students. The other thing I would add, and that the ladies missed this piece, we hit the pause button earlier in the spring semester as we were walking through this process because we weren't quite satisfied in how this would apply within our community, within our context, really from a process standpoint. But nonetheless, we clarified some questions, we customized things to meet our needs, thus the recommendation for first read to you this evening. So,
Mr. Bird, to answer your question, one more thing, I think if I was going to say what the outcome was, it's really improved relationships. Dr. Tucker had vision priorities for us 7 years ago that still stand today. Personalized learning, learner agency, informed decision making, and number one is relationships. And we know we have a long way to go with that. That is always and will continue to be our focus.
So I just have one comment on this, and that's having walked through the book and having a pretty deep understanding of what belongingness means. I was really pleased to see us land on this one. Not all kids feel like they belong in school. It's time for us to fix that, including my own. So it's time for us to ensure that all kids feel like this is their community and their home.
And I just had one comment. I mean, I'd encourage anybody that has questions about this book to pick it up and read it. We sat down and read it as a board. I read a little bit of it before I joined the board, but finished up with the group. I've got a kiddo with special needs, and when I think about inclusion through my own lens and through my own family, it's about how my child feels going to school, whether they're happy to be at school, whether they feel included. And so if there's anybody that has questions about this book, I would strongly encourage them to take a look at it and read it.
we also have a previous experience working with Core Collaborative. Can you speak to that as far as topics we've worked with them on and how that experience has been?
Yes. Well, part of the Core Collaborative was the work on what we called initially data teams. So really trying to measure the impact of our programming on student achievement. We moved from that to visible learning, which you have been hearing about for years. We're still in that work. It's a part of taking our curriculum. As you know, our curriculum is posted on our website. It is front-forward facing. So we have always published our curriculum for everyone to see. But we work through that, identifying what we call learning intentions and success criteria, in order to achieve what we're calling learner agency. So the ability for children to really know what they're intending to learn and then be able to have a pathway to get through that. So we've worked through traditional learning for a very long time, quite successfully in Liberty actually, but really trying to bring up our game and make sure that our children are owning what it is and what they want to do and how they achieve what they want when they finish with us. Is what Dr. Tucker calls thrive. And so we just really are trying to figure that out. And I can give you a very long explanation about how our curriculum for ages has really been very segmented. And we're trying to create pathways for kids so that when they get through, they feel like they've learned something that's really important to them and not just important for us to check a box. So that's really our goal. And we can lose some kids along the way. We just don't want to do that.
Other questions of Dr. Dixon Seahorn or Dr. Westfall? Again, presented to you this evening for first read. So let us know if you have thoughts, questions, comments on that as it relates to the proposal this evening. So thank you, ladies. Appreciate it very much.